Oh, yeah.
Watch this.
You know, they may come from the same political party, but they certainly come at it from different directions. And that has meant a lot of the state's top two elected leaders coming at each other. And it's happened again and again in a very public way. As we've established a couple of times already this year, when the governor goes out of state, according to the Constitution of the state, the lieutenant governor takes over as the one in charge of the state. And as we've seen, when that happens, when that's happened at least the last two times, well, we have seen some fireworks, you might say. Well, guess what? Governor Brad Little left the state again this week. But the lieutenant governor, Janice McGeachin, didn't get to do things her way this time because she says she didn't know about it. And there's some discrepancy in how each of them view who has authority when the governor is out of the state or what out of the state even means. So with the latest chapter in this saga, here's Joe Paris.
The war of the words between Idaho Governor Brad Little and his Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin is flaring up again over a familiar issue. Who is acting governor when Idaho's governor leaves the state? Friday morning, the Lieutenant Governor's office sent out a release with the title, Governor Little Leaves State Without Properly Notifying Lieutenant Governor. In the release, the Lieutenant Governor writes, quote, according to the Idaho Constitution, Article 4, Section 12, and Idaho Code, Section 67-805A, the Lieutenant Governor is to serve as acting governor during the governor's absence from the state and to serve in that position until the governor returns to that state, end quote. The release finished with the quote attributed to McGeachin saying, did the governor fail to notify my office because he didn't want me to use my position as acting governor to once again give the power and decision-making back to the people of Idaho? Regardless of his reasons, he left the state without a governor for multiple days in direct violation of the law. Does all of this sound familiar? McGeachin made this exact same point earlier this year while Little was out of state on business. In May, she issued an executive order that banned mask mandates in Idaho. Little quickly repealed the order and said the whole thing was, quote, an irresponsible, self-serving political stunt. The exact same situation played out again in early October when Governor Little traveled to the United States-Mexico border. As acting governor then, McGeachin again took the opportunity to issue another executive order that banned Idaho schools and universities from requiring proof of vaccine against COVID or a negative test. McGeachin also reached out to the Idaho National Guard about possibly deploying guardsmen to the Mexico border. Governor Little, while still in Texas at the border, again quickly repealed McGeachin's order, acting as governor. Now back to today. Yes, Governor Little was physically out of the state this week. He updated his social media accounts to show that he was at an event in Florida. The caption on the photo details that it was from an event with President Trump. Now, the photo was posted about an hour after McGeachin sent her release saying that she was never told he was leaving. The governor's office provided me a letter dated October 29th that explains to the lieutenant governor that per an attorney general's opinion, mere physical absence of the elected governor from the state does not invoke the portion of the Idaho Constitution that transfers gubernatorial powers from governor to lieutenant governor. The letter from Little to McGeachin goes on to say that in the event he does need her to step in as acting governor, he will let her know. Unless or until then, Little says, there is neither a need nor authorization for her to act as governor. Now, this all, again, is per an AG's opinion that was published in October on what absence from the state means in regards to the Idaho Constitution section on governor's powers. In short, the opinion says that absence from the state means effective absence, like being in surgery or being very sick, not just being physically out of Idaho. The argument being that modern technology allows the governor to lead the state effectively, something that wasn't an option when Idaho's Constitution was approved in 1890. Now, the caveat to all of this is, if the matter were to end up in court, a judge could find and rule differently on what absence from the state legally means.
And that's a big if, Joe, if it ends up in court. But this all leads to what these last couple of days lead up to another thing that happened today, and it has to do with compensation, because according to the Constitution, the lieutenant governor, when acting as governor, she gets a bump in pay.
She does, and it's fair because if the lieutenant governor is doing the governor's job, then they're compensated for serving in that chief executive role. And this is nothing new. It's listed in state code. But Brian, I want to pull up a letter here that the lieutenant governor actually wrote to the Department of Fiscal Management. And I know that the font's very small here, so I'll kind of just fill this in for you.
Take your word for it.
You take my word for it. Yeah, the lieutenant governor basically saying, how do we figure this out? How do we figure out exactly, how I get the money I'm supposed to get per state code as acting governor? Well, I checked in with the Department of Fiscal Management, and they say it's, there's a whole process you have to go through. They have to apply, the Lieutenant Governor has to apply for getting that money, and then it has to be approved by DFM, the Department of Fiscal Management. All of this could be complicated, though, by defining when was the Lieutenant Governor acting governor. On record, DFM only has one request for, getting payment as acting governor, and that's from May 27th of this year. But it'll be interesting to see if this ends up in court, because, of course, we want to know what it means when the governor goes out of state, but also, is the lieutenant governor owed compensation for that time?
It's also interesting to note, is that necessary to be compensated for the time that you're? Well,
that's a whole other debate.
That's a topic for another day. All right, thank you very much, Joe. More McGeachin here. Earlier this week, the lieutenant governor paid her legal bill. It cost her nearly $29,000 to lose a lawsuit filed by the Idaho Press Club. That money came straight from her office's budget. That suit, you may remember, had to do with her office refusing to release thousands of emails regarding her education task force to various media outlets who had requested them through public records requests. She eventually did cough them up months later, but only after she was threatened with a contempt of court charge. Then in August, she asked for a supplemental budget bump for her office, asking the legislature to approve an extra $50,000 to help cover those legal costs. It's a bit more than the $28K and change it cost her, which is why she has now lowered that request. We obtained an email to the Idaho Division of Financial Management dated October 18th in which Jordan Waters, that's McGeachin's chief of staff, asked to reduce that request to cover only what they had been billed so far. Her office's total budget, about $183,000, which means that $28,000 or so is about 26% of her total yearly budget. The legislature will take up her request during the next session that comes up in January. As of today, we're told her office still has not yet received a bill for her legal representation. Governor Little may have been out of state yesterday, but that didn't stop him from officially enjoining Idaho with several other states into a lawsuit against both OSHA and the Biden administration. President Biden and OSHA announcing a strict deadline of January 4th, 2022 for private companies with more than 100 employees, that they have to get them vaccinated or they have to have them tested weekly and have to wear masks. That mandate and subsequent deadline impacting some Idaho businesses like stinker stores, those gas stations with the skunk mascot. They've been around since 1936. Well, today there are more than 60 stores in Idaho employing more than 1,000 people. And because they have more than 100 employees, they are under this new mandate. They would have to comply. But are they ready to do that in less than 2 months? Here's Katya Stepovic.
OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, issued an emergency temporary standard in hopes to minimize COVID-19 spread in the workplace.
I have more than 100 employees. We operate in 3 states, Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado.
This is Charlie Jones, the owner of Stinker Stores. With almost 1,000 employees scattered across 3 states, the new standard is yet another thing to add to his to-do list. The new OSHA standard will apply to around 84 million workers, including Charlie's. And if workers don't show proof of vaccination, they must test for the virus once a week and wear a mask.
Is staffing going to be an issue for Stinker Stores?
We've raised our wages to attract employees, keep employees, frankly. And the government, unfortunately, they think larger employers have more resources and can do this maybe better. Frankly, this is not what we do. We don't enforce health vaccines or do the health or the vaccine police. That's not a basic thing of what we do. We serve customers every day.
Workers are required to get paid time off from employers when getting the COVID vaccine. And for those who don't, it's still unclear who will likely pay for weekly testing. While Stinker Stores has always highly encouraged employees to get the COVID vaccine, business owners are left wondering how and what enforcement will look like.
The step of enforcing, prove to me that you've been vaccinated. That's a big step for an employer. And the federal government recognizes that they can't enforce this. So they're putting the onus of enforcement on the employer and are sitting in the back waiting for an employer that the non-compliant guys, they've got huge fines that they can levy.
Do you think this is necessary? These new guidelines are necessary?
Hard question. I think that I think the vaccine is wonderful. I don't believe the vaccine will eliminate COVID. And these federal mandates, no, I don't think they're necessary. I don't think they're wise.
Regardless of the extra legwork, Charlie says he will do it for the safety of his employees.
We will comply with the law to the best of our ability. And as regulations are formulated and communicated, we will do our very, very best to comply.
I reached out to a number of Idaho businesses with employees of 100 or more to see what their thoughts and plans were on the new standards. Now, the YMCA got back to us and they said we will be evaluating the newly released OSHA guidelines in the coming days. They say since the pandemic began, the Treasure Valley Family YMCA has consistently followed safety guidelines from our government health authorities at a minimum, and they say we will continue to do so. OSHA employees will mainly respond to employee complaints and check for COVID compliance during typical inspections. Employers who violate the new standard can expect fines of up to $13,600. For Idaho's News Channel 7, I'm Katya Stepovic.
And again, that well, it looks at what the best of our ability is what he said. So again, that comes down to the enforcement. We'll see how that plays out. But again, private employers, more than 100 employees, they're expected to follow this mandate beginning January 4th. Of course, a lot could happen in the courts, as we've seen by this lawsuit. It kind of flew under the radar until it didn't. A gun event featuring George Zimmerman was pulled at the last minute, thanks to Treasure Valley social media. But how did it get that far in the first place? You know, we still got a little bit left in this show, so plenty of time for you to get involved in the 208 conversation. All you got to do, send a text to this number, 208-321-5614. We want to hear your questions, your comments, and yes, even your clever complaints. Just make sure you include your name and the hashtag #the208. And stick around, we might share yours at the end of the show. Right about now, the first day of a gun conference would likely be wrapping up at the Riverside Hotel in Garden City. Would likely have been. But the 4-day conference was canceled yesterday by the hotel because of whom event organizers advertised as being a big part of it. Now let's be clear, it wasn't just any old gathering of gun owners. This was supposed to be the Lethal Force Gun Laws 2021 Tactics and Strategies Conference. And if that title doesn't grab your attention, how about the name of the special guest? George Zimmerman. The plan was to have the Florida man who shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin back in 2012 in attendance as a guest speaker. You may remember, Martin was just walking in a neighborhood in Sanford, Florida, when Zimmerman thought he looked suspicious. Despite a dispatcher telling him to not get out of his car, Zimmerman did just that and approached the teenager, eventually shooting him. It took more than a month for Zimmerman to be charged with the death of the 17-year-old after claiming he shot him in self-defense, leaning on Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Because there wasn't anyone to contradict Zimmerman's version of events, he was later acquitted of second-degree murder. So at this event, to be held at the Riverside Hotel, attendees were going to hear George describe the events of that night in a chronological, step-by-step narrative. You will hear exactly what happened, the description says, directly from George. Once and for all, we will all come away knowing the truth. 5 nights, 4 days, all for $4,000. A local conference was going to highlight someone at the center of a very public example of racial profiling and the deadly outcome of it. Basically, hear how one man did it legally and how you can too. So this event got the attention of several Treasure Valley residents, and they took to social media to express their dismay that the hotel was allowing this conference to take place on their property. And the outcry gained some steam throughout the week. Then on Wednesday, the Hotel Riverside announced it had disinvited George Zimmerman from the event. And then by yesterday afternoon, the day before it was to begin, they canceled the event entirely, saying, "We would like to extend our gratitude to everyone on social media who alerted us to the fact that George Zimmerman was scheduled to speak at a conference being held at the Riverside Hotel this week. We recognize the immense pain that George Zimmerman has inflicted on many of our guests, team members, and community. We are unequivocally opposed to providing George Zimmerman a platform, and he is not welcome at the Riverside Hotel." They added they weren't aware of who was on the event's guest list or the details of what this conference was to be about. But from now on, they said, they will require a full list of speakers in advance for all events. The hotel ended its statement by saying, "We will always stand up for what we believe is right," end quote. And that decision by the Riverside Hotel earned them some praise in the community. But not quite from everyone. While it may be obvious as to why you wouldn't want someone like George Zimmerman as a guest anything, we wanted some perspective on why this might be a bad look for Boise. Philip Thompson, the executive director of Idaho's Black History Museum, says this isn't just on the event organizer.
This isn't like a conservative liberal issue. This isn't a gun rights, gun control. This is simply, a young kid was murdered because you chose to be, rent-a-cop with an attitude. There's so many other people they could have brought as far as like gun rights and the right to gun ownership and self-defense, but lethal gun laws, really? So your intent is to take the life of somebody and us giving you the legal acumen to do so. There's nothing debatable. There's no two sides to that. Just look at the title of what they call the conference. So if you feel that life is sacred and we shouldn't, find ways to orchestrate and kill people within the law, then you probably don't want to have that event. But this faux moral high ground that the hotel's taking, that, oh, were we not aware? Oh, we didn't have any idea of what was transpiring. Oh, we didn't know who was going to be here. They went through this 3 years ago with the Charles Murray issue. Same painful lesson. So either their organization needs to have some leadership conversations about, hey, let's not go through this every so often, or they need to vet what's going on more thoroughly, or the fact that it titled lethal gun laws might be an idea of that you're not something you want to push, and not only cancel it because of the reaction of the public. It's just totally insincere. Had the people not found out and then raised hell about it, it would have went on. It's very similar to the event 3 years ago. Same principle.
So yes, the Riverside Hotel has had to cancel events before at their venue out of the respect and safety of their guests and staff and community. And you heard Philip mention it there. Back in the summer of 2017, the Idaho Freedom Foundation was hosting a banquet and planned to have Charles Murray speak. Murray wrote the book, The Bell Curve, back in the 1990s. In it, he wrote about the intellectual differences between races. It was called Racist, and he would show up at other events around the country, and there were protesters there to meet him. So the Riverside canceled that event with a week's notice because they feared for the safety of their guests and their staff. So as Philip put it, you would think the hotel would have learned with that incident to be more proactive in vetting their events. And it shouldn't take the risk of a financial hit, he says, to raise their concern. But the hotel told us today they did learn their lesson 4 years ago. Kristen Jensen told us today in an email, after that IFF Charles Murray fiasco, they put a venue's right of refusal clause in their contracts. Without reading all of this legalese out loud to you, it basically says the hotel has a right to refuse or cancel an event based on any controversial speaker or subject matter that doesn't keep with the hotel's image or creates a safety or security issue. Now, that was put in place back in 2017. So what happened with this week if that was already in place? How did this event, with a scheduled speaker like George Zimmerman, make it to the day before it was supposed to take place? Well, Jensen told us, for large and high-profile events, we do try to research the scheduled speakers to the best of our ability. However, this week's event was neither large nor high-profile. It was only supposed to be about 20 to 25 people in attendance. And the hotel was told it was a simple gun safety training course, something they say they've hosted in the past without a problem. Well, they apparently weren't aware the simple gun safety course was being called Lethal Force Gun Laws 2021 Tactics and Strategies. However, the hotel made it clear it is the event planner's responsibility to let them know of any controversial speakers or content that is planned. We did try several times today to ask the event planner about this, a Mr. Heron of the Old School Gun School based in Washington. We left several messages with him, and we were actually hung up on once. We have yet to hear back. But because of what transpired this week, the hotel tells us they've actually amended that right of refusal clause, adding a requirement of a 30-day notice of all scheduled speakers. Okay, so if you were with us yesterday, and you know you were, we showed you this video. A couple of teenagers out trick-or-treating in Meridian, noticing that a candy bowl left on the front porch, well, didn't have any candy left in it. Instead of turning around and walking to the next house, though, one of them, as you see right there, deciding to do something selfless, putting candy back into the bowl out of his own bag. So we put a call out to you asking if anybody knew these boys, these kids. Thanks to you, I guess, and the power of social media, we were able to track it down. It made it to the boy's mother. And 17-year-old Brock is a senior at Ridgeview High School in Nampa. He says he hasn't gone trick-or-treating the last few years, obviously why, but decided to go last minute with his girlfriend and a few of her friends on Halloween. Brock says they ended up going out pretty late, and so they expected not really to find much, and this was their third or fourth neighborhood they went to. But he says they decided to do it in the heat of the moment.
I just know that I've gone out in the past and only got a couple handfuls of candy and been really disappointed when I was younger. And I don't know. I just figured that I didn't want other people to go through that if they were excited to go out for the first time because of COVID, if they're really young or things like that.
So yeah, he wanted to put that candy in the bowl for the next people to come up who may be, I don't know, doing it for the first time and didn't want them to be left out, which is awesome. Brock told me this afternoon he still hadn't seen the video because he just doesn't like seeing himself on camera, but we probably have an understanding that he might be seeing a few of more videos of himself out there, especially because of that, of what he did right there. By the way, he was dressed, I believe, was it Little Mermaid? What character? Eric from Little Mermaid, but the zombie version. That explains the blood on his shirt. Thanks, Brock. All right, just a couple seconds before we head out the door, but Jim wants to know this. If the lieutenant governor gets a bump in pay when Governor Little is out of the state, maybe she could use that to pay her legal bills. Maybe. See you next week.